Brad here, back in front of my wall of death, sitting in my throne of death, about to review some metal of death. Core. Close enough. As always, please remember to subscribe if you haven't yet, and join us over on Patreon. We've got tons of cool, exclusive content over there. Normally, this is where we say the genre of the band to like tease the video clip coming up, but I already said the genre. Sort of. More on that later, but now, clip.
How did they find me? Oh, I let them in. My face is a my abyss. Suffer, grow, become ants. Feel the cold is cold. All is lost in shadows. These sound the sunshine soul. All is found in shadows.
Sort of deathcore, sort of not. I'll explain more about that soon. Yep, it's the new album from For An Autopsy called Oh What the Future Holds, out today on Nuclear Blast Records. For An Autopsy was formed in 2008 by guitarists Will Putney and Pat Sheridan. The former was a one-time prodigy of big-name metal producer Machine and steadily became a monolith in the metal/hardcore scene in step with his band's ascent. It wasn't a straight shot up though. After 2 albums of relatively orthodox deathcore with killer vocalist and perennial band leaver Nate Johnson, who's also been in Through the Eyes of the Dead, Turmoil, Deadwater Drowning, Premonitions of War, and many more, the band found themselves without a vocalist. Enter Joe Battalato for their 3rd LP, Absolute Hope, Absolute Hell, and the band would, expand beyond deathcore more and more with each album moving onward through 2017's The Great Collapse and then 2019's The Sea of Tragic Beasts. This was helped alongside by the increasingly more expansive range that Joe offered. In fact, the band has identified and self-identify as post-deathcore. So now it's time to see where they fall on that spectrum. Of late, that post-categorization seems to encompass Gojira elements, and rest assured, those elements are still here, especially on the opening to Far From Heaven and its subsequent stomp. But this album feels like another post for these dudes in that they move to a post-Gojira style, and they're more Gojira in ambition, overall scope, just the weight of the whole thing. And while the song that I just mentioned and In Shadows do bring to mind their previous LP's more triumphant parts, I mean, relatively speaking, this is still extreme metal, the album as a whole is generally even bleaker. Hell, take the clip I played earlier from In Shadows, in which the backing vocals repeat the title. The mood flips on a dime from a more steady In Shadows to a downtrodden In Shadows. And I probably just butchered that, but it shows, the duality of the mood here. And it's a little damper, darker. The somber mood is no more present than on Two Towers, which brings to mind Deftones in its more quiet moments. Honestly, I didn't Google this, but I would not be surprised if someone called Deftones post-nu metal. So everything, around this album and its sound is post something. And post is when somebody breaks out of the confines. As I said earlier, these guys aren't playing in a box. They even flirt with what is traditionally referred to as post-metal, Neurosis, Isis, and all those bands, which comes into play on the closing track, The Man That I Was Not, specifically its closing refrain of There Will Never Be a Light for the Blackhearts, which is entrancing in its delivery and depressing. I play that part now, but I don't want to ruin the moment. You should experience that song for what it is. Better yet, you should experience the album as a whole for what it is, with that as its capstone. But all of this talk about the quieter, moodier moments may have tricked you into thinking these dudes went soft, which they did not. neither musically nor lyrically. Case in point is the single Pandora, which makes one ponder with this really poignant lyric that really struck home to me when it says, "It's never too many graves, it's always not enough shovels." The fact that it's sandwiched between fleet-fingered mellow death and a devastating breakdown just makes its message slam home that much harder.
Walk down the wasteland, whitewashing the rubble. It's never too many graves, it's always not enough shovels. In the eye of the storm, in the eye of the storm, in the eye of the storm. All is gone, but then comes the killing.
All is calm, and then comes the killing, indeed. Other killers or crushers on the album include Collateral Damage, which is the closest that it gets to kind of a standard deathcore banger, but in these hands, standard means much more, considering Putney is the genre's standard bearer when it comes to, production. And then there's a Higher Level of Hate, which opens with a tribal drum beat before some Meshuggah-esque riffing transitions the song to a part where the vocals lockstep with the music in some kind of simultaneous dance/battle.
Pain and test of this race are solely illicit. And you love the poison of the architect. All emotion reduced into analytics. Fall into it, now escape. Refine, eliminate, obsolete. Civil ideology. Hostages of the shadow state. A higher level of hate.
For whatever reason, when I came up with that analogy, I was immediately reminded of the lightsaber battle between Darth Maul and both Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan during Star Wars Episode 1. It's brash and raw, yet fluid and beautiful, all underneath some truly emotionally affecting music. If that doesn't make you want to listen to the song to hear what's next, I don't know what will. Speaking of what's next, I've got to delve into the worst parts of this album, and I put that in quotes on purpose. I feel like later songs such as Savages and Conditional Healing won't be the ones that you gravitate to when you're trying to just, get a quick banger out. But right when I was ready to write them off as, the worst parts, I listened to them again and realized there was still a lot to like. I like the airy tapping in the background of Conditional Healing, and Savages is just like a driving mellow death-led ripper. So even if I don't gravitate them to a 5 or 10 minute headbang session, they have their place on the album as a whole, which is really how I find Fit for an Autopsy is best experienced more than most bands in the deathcore genre. Fit for an Autopsy is a band for whom I never feel comfortable proclaiming an album their masterpiece. And that's not because they haven't made an album worthy of that title. No, it's because they always manage to outdo themselves and up the ante. So for me to preemptively say that this is their pinnacle would be unfair for what is to come. This album feels like a bit of a companion piece to the Sea of Tragic Beasts, perhaps ironically giving that album's title, that includes the word tragic. That album felt a little bit more hopeful with its triumphant yell singing, whereas this feels more downtrodden, which is perhaps not that surprising during the pandemic during which it was written. However, that pandemic and the resultant downtime also gave the band more time to explore and continue to expand their sound, which led to a remarkably complete album for a band who specializes in this sort. I also reviewed this album for Decibel, so if you want a more eloquently written but shorter take on the album from me, check that out. But in that review, I explained that it's clear from the mood and the lyrics that the O in the title of Oh, What the Future May Hold is meant to be said despondently with a sigh. Oh, what the future may hold. The future ain't looking great for the world at large, but that's not the case for Fit for an Autopsy, who continue their trajectory upward and their hot streak as a band. I'm giving this album 4 out of 5 skulls on Overkill Reviews. So, it's shoutout time, and this week was noted for the absurd amount of quality genre releases, especially when it comes this early in the year. But you've got to wait for those. First up, I want to mention a couple releases which I'm lucky enough to work on. Just today, we dropped a new song from Fetal Blood Eagle from the upcoming release Indoctrinate, out February 25th on Listenable Records. This is one of 2 bands I'm working on that features aborted vocalist Sven DeCalloway, which also includes Coffin feeder, whose EP stereo Homicide is out in just 2 weeks, January 28th. Sven's day job of a band makes death metal with enough groove to appeal to your average deathcore kid, and this is no different. So if you're a fan of Fit for an Autopsy, you're watching this, you'll probably like these. Check them both out. I also want to throw it back to December 8th to an album that throws it back to the brutal origins of the deathcore genre, and that's Japan's Deviloof and their album Dystopia. Anyway, now we're finally arriving at the quality genre releases of today. Up first, we've got the new one from Shadow of Intent called Elegy, which they released independently in collaboration with Bloodblast Distribution digitally. These guys used to be more in line with deathcore, but have steadily shifted more towards a straight up symphonic metal sound, and I don't mean that in the same way as like Apocalyptica or Epica. It's much more brutal and retains that deathness, but the core is more subdued. Speaking of symphonic and deathcore, we've got Worm Shepherd and their album Ritual Hymns out today on Unique Leader Records. These guys are really young, from the northeast of the US, and just absolutely brutal. It's more blackened in addition to the symphonic elements than Shadow of Intent, who are more melodic and maybe more death metal leaning, but they're definitely worth checking out. Actually, all of these bands are worth checking out. Anyway, thank you so much for watching my review. Let us know what you think about it in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.
Pain attached to this race are slowly illustrated into the persuasion of the architect. All emotion reduced into analytics. Fall into it, now escape. Refine, eliminate, obsolete,